Traveling with President Trump in Asia seemed to signal some optimism about a deal with China. What are you going to be watching for this week?
So clearly he believes that there's a deal, and I think he's trying to set a moment up in which there can be a deal. I think the big issue, and you pushed him on it, was this issue of soybeans.
Yeah.
You know, 20% of the soybean crop in America used to get purchased by China. And so the question is whether you're going to see that be a part of the deal, how much of that is part of the deal. I think the rare earths is going to be a huge issue. But then there's other issues that no one's talking about. You know, Russian oil, I think, is going to be part of this conversation. I think there's going to be even chips. I think the NVIDIA piece of this, you know, all of these chips that are being used for AI today. And so I think we're going to have to see who's really got the leverage in this negotiation.
All right. Well, it is going to be a fascinating 5 days. Susan, kind of in the backdrop of this is all of the tensions that we're tracking here at home. And the visual manifestation of that may just be tearing down the East Wing of the White House. I want to read you what conservative columnist Peggy Noonan had to say in the Wall Street Journal. She said, the photos of the tearing down of the East Wing were upsetting because they felt like a metaphor for the idea that history itself can be made to disappear. This really touched a nerve with people. Why do you think that is, Susan?
You know, I mean, it's the week that the metaphor became reality, right? You know, I remember, in fact, back in Trump's first term when Republican Senator Bob Corker, then the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he said to me, he said, you know, Trump has the instincts of a human wrecking ball. Well, here we are, you know, literally Trump deploying an actual wrecking ball. And I think what struck people like Peggy Noonan, that was a really powerful column, but a lot of people, conservatives, liberals, it's not about ideology. It's about a president who seems to think that there are no rules that apply to him and he can do almost anything in impunity in this second term. To me, that's the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. No process. You know, read the Washington Post story about what it would take if you wanted to renovate your front door in Georgetown, okay, in a historic district. And then the president can just knock down a historic building. So it's not so much, it seems like the White House wants to make it about the ballroom, but it's not about that. It's a classic example of the question of Trump and does he recognize any limits to his power?
You know, Mark, Susan points out the differences between Trump 1.0 and 2.0. No one knows them better than you because you lived through it. How do you see this moment evolving as we talk about all of these competing factors, the tensions over trade, the shutdown here back at home, and then all of the bipartisan criticism we've seen with tearing down the East Wing?
I think the photos are jarring, and I think the reality is that the White House belongs to the American people. It's temporarily occupied by each different president. There's a process to make changes like that. Having said that, I don't think we appreciate how much voters elected Donald Trump to tear down much of Washington, D.C. That's what they wanted. I think the bigger issue is going to be heading into the midterms next year and throughout continues to be the trade agenda. I mean, to your interview with Scott Bessent, in 2 weeks, the administration is going to stand in front of the Supreme Court making oral arguments to defend IEPA, which says that in our national emergency, the president can assess tariffs. What exactly is the national emergency frontier running ads of Ronald Reagan? What is the defense to say that's a national emergency? And how upside down is our world today that a quasi-socialist economy in Canada is running ads as one of America's greatest presidents, extolling the virtues of free trade, and a Republican president is condemning the words of Ronald Reagan and has more central planners in their administration than any Democrat administration in the last 100 years. It's an upside-down world that we're living in right now.
And also notable when I asked the Treasury Secretary about the new tariffs that he plans to impose against Canada, the 10%, Ashley, he wasn't sure if that applied to all goods. What is the Democratic view, particularly as increasingly polls are showing frustration with both parties over this government shutdown and the question, who's going to blink first here?
I mean, it's interesting. I was watching the secretary and I was asking myself, what world is he living in? He clearly isn't living in the shoes of the American people. I mean, I think the political pitfall for the president right now is this split screen. Here is the emperor building this big, beautiful ballroom. Meanwhile, federal workers are in line and food banks. You've got a situation where the president's trying to shake down DOJ for $230 million of taxpayer money, by the way, and we're suffering from higher grocery costs, electricity costs. He's bailing out Argentina. Meanwhile, our farmers are told to eat cake. That is really what's at play here. And when the Democrats considered the issue of the shutdown, it's not. I don't think they're going to take any responsibility for it. forward. It's the president. He owns it. It's his choice. He can lift it right now and get us out of this shutdown right now if he cared anything about the American people and their increasing health
I
care
think the
premiums.
Democrats were pretty quiet during the Biden years when all their spending basically started all this inflation we're experiencing.
Well, you know we were.
And the reality is that right now, almost every Republican voted for funding to keep government open, and almost every Democrat voted to shut down the government. So to say this is the president's fault is ridiculous.
Well,
the Democrats caused this shutdown. It's not
Mark,
to condone. It's not to condone, particular actions of the trade agenda, but to sit here and say that this is the president's fault is ridiculous.
Mark, with
the
all due
Democrats
respect, the
caused the
president
shutdown.
has overseen more shutdowns than any other president in American history. The president has
Every Democrat voted against funding the government. You voted against funding the government. How can you say that's the president's fault?
Let me just, for one moment, bring Andrew back into this, because he does have this new book, 1929, and of course
Excellent
the economy
author promote.
is what, yes, looms over all of this. You write, Andrew, inside the greatest crash in Wall Street history and how it shattered a nation. And what's fascinating about the book are some of the parallels that one can draw between then and now. Talk a little bit about that and this debate.
Right. Look, I don't want to suggest that we are in 1929,
Yeah.
but we might be in 1999, and there are these parallels. By the way, tariffs being just one. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which went into effect in 1930, literally 12 months later, global trade had dropped by 60%. I'm not suggesting we will be there, but there's a possibility that it's going to have...
Tariff rate is highest it's been in 100 years.
It's going to have a real impact. And I think right now, when you look at our economy, it is a tale of two cities, or two countries, in fact. There's the AI country, artificial intelligence, which is driving almost the entirety of our growth in this nation right now, and everything else. And there are these elements of inflation, while decelerating, like the Treasury Secretary said. You look at meat, you look at furniture, you look at the things that we are living with. This great experiment around tariffs means ultimately things are going to cost more, and there's going to be less competition, full stop. And just one other point, Jason Furman of Harvard did a study recently looking at AI. If you take out all the AI spending in America right now, our economy is flat.
Susan, weigh in here, particularly as we're less than 2 weeks away from elections, off-year elections in Virginia and New Jersey for the governor's seat. The economy is still the number one issue. Spending, affordability, that's what voters still care about.
And that's what voters always care about. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing, right? You go back to, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, it's always the economy. And I think Trump was very successful in 2024 in shaping a perception about inflation. He's really good at repeating a lie over and over again. So he told people it's the worst inflation in the history of the universe. And even if people didn't accept that, they accepted the idea that that was the framework. Well, now what we haven't heard, and I'm interested to see what Republicans say about this, we haven't heard any ownership that there's a connection between Trump's attempt to upend the global trading economy and what's happening here at home. But I can tell you, going to the grocery store, that maybe Scott Bassett doesn't go to the grocery store, but it's expensive, and it's more expensive. And the question is when people, and if they start to blame President Trump for his trade policies in connection with that.
Mark, what about that issue? And do you think that it's going to loom large over these gubernatorial races? The New Jersey race closer, I think, than folks were anticipating, certainly, but the Republican candidate there, Jack Ciattarelli, walking a really fine line when it comes to
Look, I
President
think
Trump.
all of us around this table can afford our groceries. I think the challenge is in middle America, particularly in the agricultural community. I think that's where the tariffs are having their greatest impact. And even though CPI is at 3%, to the president's credit, he's lowered energy prices by 25 to 30%, but that shows you that the tariff impact is actually even greater when you take that into effect. I think for the elections, look, I think that the elections this year are mostly in blue states. I think the one bright spot for Republicans will be Jason Miyares in Virginia. Outside of that, I think it'll pretty much be a Democrat year.
Why, Andrew, is the economy always and still the number one issue, and borne out by your book here?
Because people always, always, always vote with their wallet. That is the lesson of history. And so when you see what's happening right now and the costs going up, invariably the costs are going up. By the way, the St. Louis Fed has some math. They say the costs are going up. So when people say, maybe tariffs aren't a thing, it's a thing.
Well, the other big thing, we got some news from your former boss,
Okay.
former Vice President Kamala Harris, who said in a new interview that she is not ruling out a run for president for a third time in 2028. What do you make of that? Were you surprised to hear her say that?
I wasn't surprised, but I'm very excited about the possibility.
Okay.
I mean, I hope that there is a robust conversation within the Democratic Party. We have our own issues. I mean, I think we're suffering from major crises. You know, we're going through an identity crisis. We're draining support among our base voters. There's a growing trust gap. I mean, and this has been persisting and getting worse since 2012. So I really hope that she does get in the race, but I hope there becomes a more robust conversation about the direction of the party.
Mark, if she gets into the race?
I think Republicans are equally excited to run against Kamala Harris. So.
Susan, last thought.
Look, it's early yet. Let's talk about this again after the 26 midterm elections. I think, you know, the question there really is, can Democrats perform historically as they are expected to do well? And does it even matter anymore when Donald Trump has so expanded executive power? My question is, since he doesn't go to the Congress when it's Republicans, is he going to care at all if it is Democratic?
Yeah,
All right. Well, we will be watching closely again. Andrew Ross Sorkin, 1929. Congrats. Thank you all for being here. Great.